Let's build your vocabulary by learning some very, very, very useful words and phrases when talking about the economy. Now, I'll go ahead and say yes. The topic is the economy. It may not sound like the most exciting thing in the world, but I will say that I do think this is incredibly important because this is something, the economy, it affects all of us. And I think nowadays you will come across a lot of this vocabulary if you're watching the news or you're reading a newspaper because it's important, because it's impactful. And again, even in your work life and your business, your career. So although the topic may not sound super exciting, I think it is incredibly useful. And I want to teach you some advanced words and phrases that I think are going to help you navigate these conversations as well so that you can talk about this topic. If you would like to get the lesson notes, just click on the link down below in the description. Join our email community. If you're already a part of it, check your inbox. I've sent them to you, but I might as well go ahead and introduce myself as well. In case this is your first time here, my name is Wes. The channel is Interactive English. It's all about helping you reach your fluency goals. And I want to help you build your vocabulary and learn some important words and phrases. So let's start with collocations. These are words that are frequently used together. And I say economic collocations because these are all collocations with the word economic. So let's begin. I want you to participate in the lesson. Write your answers in the chat, in the comments. I always love it when you participate in these lessons. It is interactive English after all. So as consumers cut back on spending, economists fear that it might result in an economic what? So think about the situation. And this is a phrase that you will often hear. An economic would be the result of consumers. They cut back on spending. If you're unfamiliar with that phrasal verb, to cut back on something just means to reduce. So you reduce your spending, you cut back on your spending, and then that may result in an economic what? This, some of them, there may be maybe more than one word that can be used. This one, I do think it is more specific. There's just one word, and I do see a correct answer. Good job, Julia. An economic downturn. So this, I'll give you the meaning down here. It refers to a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months. And you would talk about an economic downturn. Things are slowing down, and that's when people cut back on spending. So a good phrase to keep in mind, because I think this is more common, that you might hear people talk about an economic downturn than you would other words like a depression, which is a real catastrophe or a crisis, things like that. The next question. These are other important words. All of these words in this lesson are incredibly important. Unemployment, inflation, which is a word we've heard a lot of the last couple of years, and GDP are examples of economic what? Unemployment, inflation, and GDP are examples of economic. We're going to come back to, well, some of this in just a little bit. But what do you think? These are certain parts of the economy that they'll measure, and you could say that, like, individually, we look at each one, and those are different economic indicators. So if you hear somebody, they're talking about economic indicators, there's the meaning. They are leading, coincident, or lagging figures that indicate broad conditions. And they tell us, well, what's going on with the economy? Economic indicators. How about this? According to most forecasters, the economic for the next quarter is slow growth at best. Now, these are not these are example sentences. This is not actually, not talking about the state of any particular economy. But according to most forecasters, the economic for the next quarter is slow growth at best. One thing to keep in mind when you're trying to think about what word best fits that. We're talking about the next quarter, which is the future. So what word would also imply the future, the economic for the next quarter? And you may hear it when talking about the next quarter, the next year. So in this case, nice, ZS, the economic outlook. So if you're talking about the economic outlook, we're referring to a future time. What is the economy going to be like in the future? What is the economic outlook? And you might use certain economic indicators to try to determine the economic outlook. The expected future state of an economy encompassing factors such as growth rates, unemployment levels, and inflation rates. Again, we just talked about some of those economic indicators. How about this? This one I think is very common. It's a little more broad. The economic of the strike was severe. The economic of the strike was severe. So if there is a group of people and they go on strike, they refuse, they're not working, maybe they're trying to negotiate, that's going to cause problems, and it could have a severe economic what? This is a pretty common word that I think you could use it with other adjectives. One key thing to think of would be that preposition of, the economic of something. So in this case, we're talking about the economic of the strike. I saw a couple, nice, good job, correct answer. Again, I think it's maybe a little easier because this is incredibly common, the economic impact. Well played, everyone. So when you refer to something as having an economic impact, we're talking about a financial effect that something, especially something new, has on a situation or person. And people may ask questions like, well, what will the economic impact of this thing be? Or it's going to have a positive economic impact, or in this case, something negative, a severe economic impact. In countries like Thailand, tourism has a strong economic impact. I'm using it again. Tourism does have a strong economic impact on the overall economic. Now, I wanted to use economic impact. The sentence does sound a little redundant using the word economic more than once, but I just wanted to keep bringing these collocations up. We're talking about countries like Thailand, tourism. It's very important. It has a strong economic impact on the overall economic what? And a key word for this one, a little bit of a hint, would be overall. So overall, we're talking about, everything, which could be businesses, restaurants, employment, how many people are coming. So there are maybe there's another, different words you could use, but the collocation that I wanted to get you thinking about was the economic environment. So if we're talking about the economic environment, it is the condition of a country's economy and the way that it influences how effectively businesses can work, how much profit they can make, etc. I think I saw some responses like the overall economic development. Sure, that would work as well. So in this one, I do think there are other nouns that you could put in there that would also work. But the collocation that I wanted to highlight was economic environment. What is the economic environment? Is there a favorable economic environment? Is it good for businesses, or maybe the economic environment is struggling? Here is another one. This is my last set of collocations, and then we're going to look at some useful vocabulary. I put two in there, and I think both of them are pretty common. They're pretty broad, and I think these may be a little easier. The economic coming in suggests that there will be strong economic in the second half of the year. Again, there are a couple of words and phrases that I think will help you figure out what word is missing. So the economic coming in, something is coming in, you are receiving this information. So what type of economic information might you receive? And then there will be a strong economic in the second half of the year. And a key word there would be strong, because I feel like this is another word that's often used as part of these collocations. So there's two blanks in there. The economic coming in. So we're talking about information that's coming in, which would, in this case, refer to the economic data. The economic data or data, either one, coming in suggests there will be strong economic in the second half of the year. In that case, I was trying to get you thinking about growth, strong economic growth. So those are the two collocations for this sentence. Economic data is just the data describing an actual economy, past or present, and then the economic growth just refers to an increase in the production of economic goods and services in one period of time compared with a previous period. I feel that I'm giving you the meaning of these, but I feel like if you see these, you know these meanings if somebody's talking about economic growth and you understand that. I really just want to highlight these collocations because these are the phrases that you will likely come across again and again and again. And then even though I think a lot of this is a part of your passive vocabulary, the goal is then to try to make it a part of your active vocabulary. You come across it enough, you'll feel comfortable using it, you're having a conversation, and you won't have any trouble talking about certain economic indicators and how they are influencing the economic outlook. And hopefully there's going to be economic growth, and it's just going to be a natural part of your speaking vocabulary. So this is an acronym that I've already mentioned. GDP is the standard measure of value, of the value added created through the production of goods and services in a country during a certain period. So this is the technical definition for GDP. My question for you is, what does GDP stand for? So if you watch certain shows or you're watching the news and an economist is out there, they're talking about the economy, you're going to hear GDP a lot. And they'll talk about GDP, GDP, GDP. And they're not really often going to say the entire phrase. They're just going to use the acronym, which is, well, good. I feel like this one you're probably familiar with. Gross domestic product. So gross domestic product is the standard measure of value added created through the production of goods and services in a country during a certain period. GDP, gross domestic product. How about this question? Governments use policy. I've highlighted policy because I think this is another common collocation when talking about the economy. Governments use policy to control the amount of money in an economy and how easily available it is. So when thinking about this situation and trying to control the amount of money that is in the economy that's available, or trying to, take money out, the policy has a specific name. And I don't want to give it away, but you would hear people talk about policy, and a key word would be money. Thinking about something that is related to money. It is not a money policy. It's not a currency policy. It is referred to as a monetary policy. So a central bank will establish the monetary policy for a government, for a nation, and that is how they're going to try to control the amount of money in the economy, and they will pursue a certain monetary policy. Monetary policy. Excellent. Here are just some examples just to show you how common. I didn't really have to look very hard. I just took some news headlines that are using this phrase just to give you some examples. Bank of Japan reverses gear on monetary policy, back to managing inflation. Oil up 1% ahead of Fed's monetary policy decision. How quickly do prices respond to monetary policy? The impact of artificial intelligence on the macroeconomy and monetary policy. And then finally, the strength of monetary policy in emerging markets. Again, just looking at these headlines, I don't know if you're like, okay, these articles do not sound like that fascinating that you want to read them. Perhaps you do enjoy this content. Again, it's not a topic that I think most people would say is incredibly exciting. However, it is incredibly important because this affects all of us. Here's something else that can affect you. And I'm kind of, building on top of some of the things we've been discussing so far. QE is a monetary policy strategy. We just talked about monetary policy. QE is a monetary policy strategy used by central banks. With QE, a central bank purchases securities in an attempt to reduce interest rates, increase the supply of money, and drive more lending to consumers and businesses. So again, with this acronym, because most of the time you hear economists or people talking, they're going to talk about QE. And it's just a lot easier, it's a lot faster just to say the two letters QE. But what does QE stand for? It is a monetary policy strategy. Basically, when we talk about QE, they're purchasing securities. We're just putting money into the system. We're increasing the supply of money is what is referred to like QE. So if you are somebody who reads articles about the economy, about business, what's going on, how is this affecting the world or your country, then this is an acronym maybe you've heard of before. And in that case, you know that QE stands for quantitative easing. Excellent. Well done, Lolly, ZS. All right, Manuel, good. So quantitative easing, QE, this is the monetary policy that central banks use if they want to try to increase the supply of money, drive more lending, reduce interest rates, and it's known as QE, quantitative easing. How about this? There are two blanks missing in this sentence. And again, one of them is a collocation, and that's what I tried to highlight. The US economy lost trillions of dollars due to the tech, I should say in the 1990s, I apologize, which resulted in the stock market of 2001. So there are two things that I want you to think about. These are other words and phrases when talking about the economy. They lost trillions of dollars in the tech in the 1990s, which resulted in the stock market of 2001. I don't know, depends on how old you were at that time. You may very well remember what happened. And in that case, it'll be a little bit easier to think of the words that I'm referring to. The tech, this is something that absolutely happened in the 1990s. It's a word that I feel like is often used when talking about stocks and the stock market. And people might say there's a Or to give you another example, later on, fast forward in the early 2000s, especially in the US, there was a housing This is the first blank that I'm talking about. The tech or if you want to talk about the early 2000s, there was a housing So what I'm referring to, the first one, because the next one, it resulted in a market crash. I think that is pretty common. You can kind of see the picture with the arrow going down, a market crash. But before the crash, typically what ends up leading to that is people are very enthusiastic and they're just buying, 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 and it ultimately leads to a bubble. So in this case, are talking about the tech bubble. The value of these companies were really inflated in the late 1990s especially, and it just got to a point where it just wasn't sustainable. And then that bubble burst, and that led to the stock market crash. So a bubble is used to refer to a significant, usually rapid, increase in asset prices that is soon followed by a collapse in prices. And that market crash would be like the collapse, the sudden dramatic decline of stock prices across the stock market. So not really just with one, but what many. So I had mentioned before, in the early 2000s in the US, there was a housing bubble, in which case the value of homes was just inflated, and that led to the housing crisis. So these are just some words to keep in mind. Even now, if I watch some finance news, people might talk about within the stock market an AI bubble. Everybody's investing in all these companies that are using an AI or talking about using AI, and the prices have been inflated. And some people are like, oh, okay, I think there's a little bit of a bubble, and it could pop, and then the prices come back down. And others say, no, it's not a bubble, that these prices are justified. Here is one that I think these words are important, and I wanted to present them to you together. So number 1 and 2, and I'm just giving you the meaning. The is the cumulative amount of money the government has borrowed throughout our nation's history. Right? Key word, throughout the history of the nation. The other word that's missing, is the difference between the money the government takes in and what the government spends each year. And I wanted to highlight these because I think these words are commonly confused. So the first one, we're talking about the history, and then the next one, we're just focused on that year. How much is the government taking in and receiving, and how much is the government spending? So in number 2, we're talking about that 1 year, and that amount is referred to as the what. I think when I show you these are words you know, these are words that you've heard before, but I just want to make sure that the meaning is very clear, because as I said, these are words that may be commonly confused, mostly because they sound pretty similar. So when talking about the amount of money that has been borrowed throughout a nation's history, the amount of money that needs to be paid back, we're referring to the debt that a country or government has versus 1 year, in which case we're then referring to the deficit. Debt, deficit. So I think, especially now that it's an election year, I feel like politicians will creatively use these words to make their point. And mostly I think it's done disingenuously, maybe to confuse voters. But the debt is the overall amount that is owed throughout the history versus the deficit, which would just be typically over a year. Or I just mentioned the elections. You could say that during any administration, especially in the US, because there's always a deficit each year, whether it's going back to, Obama had, deficits throughout the Trump administration from 2016 to 20, there were deficits. And then throughout the Biden administration, there were more deficits. And then all of that is just being added to the debt. And of course, now with it an election year, everybody has an idea of how we're not going to have any more deficits. We're going to have a surplus, and then that's going to help us reduce the debt. I'm skeptical. But here is a funny little picture that maybe helps put it into context a little bit. So basically, the debt is always going to be much larger than the deficit, because the deficit is just really like that calendar year. So you have the deficit, which most people can see, and this is what I think a lot of people talk about, because it's a smaller number. And then you have the debt, which is underneath that iceberg, which is massive, which people don't really see, which stays hidden. And I think because, at least in the US, because it's so large, I think a lot of people want to try to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. So you have the deficit versus the debt. I hope that's clear. How about this right here? Is a period of temporary economic decline during which trade and industrial activity are reduced, generally identified by a fall in GDP in 2 successive quarters. This is I guess, one of the more technical definitions for this word, even though the word in general is used loosely. And I think some people tried to use it as an answer before and a question mark, but this is the definition for this. Economic decline over a period of time, technically speaking, would be when GDP, gross domestic product, would fall in 2 successive quarters. This would be the technical definition for identifying what would be referred to as a recession. The economy has entered a recession, and we have had 2 quarters of GDP, 2 quarters in which GDP has fallen. And you could say that we are in a recession, or there is an economic recession, if you want to use a collocation. But this is a word that you will hear a lot. Recession, recession, recession. You're going to hear it a lot more. The more severe one would be a depression. But this is more common that an economy will enter into a recession, and then they're going to try to get out of that and resume and have more economic growth, just to use that collocation. So keep in mind, this is the technical meaning of a recession, but in general, this is when the economy is declining. Which verb best completes this sentence? Our house, by 20% in 2 years. This is a verb that is used in finance. It's used when talking about the economy, such as this. We're talking about buying and selling homes when we're referring to the economy. Our house, by 20% in 2 years. What word really kind of captures this meaning? And there are other ways that you could use this verb. What do you think? Any guesses? So we're saying that in this case, I want to say that the value has increased. And maybe I could have given you that context, that we're talking about increasing, because you could use it the other way as well. So what I was trying to say is it increases, in which case our house has appreciated by 20% in 2 years. To appreciate is to increase in value. But of course, if I were to talk about it in the other way, you could say our house depreciated by 20% in 2 years. That could also happen, in which case it is to decrease in value. But the one that I wanted to talk about was when you're saying something increases in value, because I want to stay positive. That's what we all hope will happen, that the assets that we buy, especially if it's like a home, that it's going to appreciate over time. Some other collocations, if we're going to use this verb to appreciate, you could use it with several different adverbs: to appreciate significantly, or appreciate considerably, or appreciate dramatically. Or when talking about currency, you may come across this collocation: to appreciate against something. If I say, oh, the US dollar has appreciated against the euro, and it has gone up in value. But to go up in value, keep in mind, is to appreciate. To go down in value, to decrease, is to depreciate. What do you think? This is a word that I feel like you're coming across it more often in the US because it's been in the news recently. But this is a noun. It just refers to the exclusive control of a market supply of a product or service. Is referred to as a what? And I think a key word is exclusive control. You control the supply of a product or service, then you could say that your business has a what? Or your business is a what? It is also the name of a very well-known board game that has been around for a long time, which also deals with, I think, is a good game, teaching people about money and finances and how it's used. So, exclusive control of a market supply of the market supply of a product or service is referred to as a monopoly. Excellent. I think this is a word that you all know. You've heard it before. I say it's been in the news a lot, especially in the US, because you do have I think it's the FCC or the FTC going after certain companies as being a monopoly, whether it's Google is now in court, whether or not they are a monopoly, Microsoft, I think Apple recently, there was a suit filed against them probably 3 or 4 months ago, again, claiming that, okay, I think that this company is operating as a monopoly. What do you think? I'll tell you, this is a phrase, but this is a phrase that you have heard of, that you know, and I'm basically giving you the meaning of this phrase. The level of wealth and comfort people have in a particular society is referred to as the what? And I think this is a very useful phrase, even in conversations when you're talking about different countries, different places you may or may not want to live. And you might wonder, like, well, what is the what? And then you could use this phrase, the level of wealth and comfort people have in a particular society. I was going to give you a word in there, but I thought it would make it too easy. The word that I was going to give you is of. The of. So there are 3 words, and I'm talking about, excellent, the standard of living. This refers to the wealth and comfort people have in a particular society, and you would talk about the standard of living. I think this is a common phrase that you see it, you hear it, you know what it means, and hopefully if you're having a conversation, you'll feel comfortably actively using it and talking about, well, what's the standard of living in this place, and referring to the wealth and comfort people have in a society. So to give you some more examples, here are some news headlines. Again, this is incredibly common. Government's policy settings have caused the collapse in Australian standard of living. That's not good. Millions will struggle with a minimum standard of living if state pension age rises. I just took these at random. Canadian standard of living continues decline. And then finally, New Zealand standard of living going backwards report. Well, as far as the news, there's not much positive at least when I looked yesterday and just got the first few articles I saw, it seems to be pretty negative as far as standard of living goes. I don't know if you live in these countries or have been there, if you feel like this is true, but these are these are recent articles that I found just yesterday when talking about standard of living. But hopefully it gives you, again, a better idea as to how you're going to use this phrase in context. Here is a review of all of the vocabulary I wanted to go over. Of course, my goal is that you always learn something new. And if you did, I would love it and appreciate it if you hit that like button. And again, if you want to get a copy of these lesson notes, check out that link down below in the description. The last thing, I always want to know how you did on this economic quiz, on this quiz on the economy. So I'm going to put a poll in there, and you can tell me how you did on the quiz. How did you do on the quiz on the economy? Again, there are many other words and phrases. I just chose ones that I think are useful, ones that you're going to come across, which is why I really wanted to highlight some of those collocations. I rocked it, maybe 100%. Let's see, not bad would be 75%. I'll add some options. Okay. Let's say that's 50%. And I need to read more articles about the, I need to read more. I'll say economic articles. There we go. What do you think? Let me know how you did. I'm always interested in getting your feedback, hearing from you, whether this was too easy, too difficult. But this is a topic that I think is incredibly important, even if it's one that you don't find the most interesting, because when you look at the meaning of some of these words and phrases, yes, they don't sound too exciting. But they are very useful in conversations. You're talking about the future of the country you live in, the economy, the state of the economy, and you can hopefully use some of these phrases if you're referring to, well, the economic outlook, or maybe the economy is heading into an economic downturn, or if there's a bubble. And just knowing the difference between debt and deficit, I think, can be incredibly useful. So it seems like it was a bit challenging, which, again, hopefully you guys learned something new in that case, which makes me happy. But if you enjoyed the lesson, you can let me know by hitting that like button. As always, thank you so much for watching and being here. Let me give some quick shout outs. Lolly, Manuel, Chile, Julia, ZS, Dio, Julio. Thank you guys for being here and participating in this lesson. And I will see you very soon for another lesson in the future.